Hello and welcome to DXC Tech Thursday. Today we're live with HazardHub, and HazardHub is one of our finalists and winners from the DXC Invitational. We're going to be talking about the Invitational. My name is Faisal Siddiqui. I'm Chief Technologist for Innovation and Ecosystems, and along with Phil Korecki, one of the guiding people for the DXC Invitational. So Phil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Folks, good morning, good afternoon, wherever this finds you. Phil Korecki here, sector lead technologist for insurance here in the Americas, and frankly, the co-sponsor, if you would, and driver around our DXC Invitational with Faisal. DXC Invitational is the DXC effort to recognize that we can no longer be the smartest people in the room around everything in any given industry. And as insurance is maturing and changing so rapidly, it's enough for us to be maturing our products, developing a digital platform for use within the industry. But it's not enough to leverage the true innovation that's happening out there on a regular basis. And our Invitational brought together some of the best InsurTech, FinTech startups that are out there, others that have been around for a while. And frankly, it was a speed dating effort to meet as many folks as we could around their capabilities. And frankly, a very exciting time where we are meeting a number of companies that have wonderful capabilities, great innovation, sound thinking, and went through a process where we've culminated in our 4 finalists at our conference and our People's Choice winner, HazardHub, whom we're going to do a session with today, discuss, what the Invitational is about for them, what their product set does, it brings to our broader digital ecosystem. So with that, I'm going to introduce Bob Frady, the CEO and one of the founders of HazardHub. Bob, why don't you get us going on how HazardHub came to be and who you are?
Well, hi, I'm Bob Frady. I'm the CEO and co-founder of HazardHub. HazardHub got started because my former mother-in-law's place flooded. And I looked up all the data, and I found out that she wasn't in a flood zone, but she was right next to it. And I said, did anybody tell you were right next to a flood zone? And she said, no. The mortgage company didn't tell her because it didn't require flood insurance. And the homeowner's insurance company didn't tell her because they don't cover flood. So I thought this tremendous information imbalance between consumers and carriers. So John and I, who were working together at the time, my co-founder, John Sigmund, who's on the call with us, said, we can probably figure out how to build something that would help to leverage that imbalance. So we built a product, we built a prototype, and the people we were working for at the time basically said, thanks, but no thanks. and it was disappointing. And it's one of those things, sometimes you get a song stuck in your head and you can't get rid of it. Basically, this idea stuck in our head for almost 4 or 5 years. And we finally got together and said, there's a business here, let's do something about it. And HazardHub was built. Our first site was Free Home Risk, which still works. It's there for people to look up the risk around their property. And we give the information to people. It's always free to consumers. And we continue to build out from that really small idea into what is now, we think, the most comprehensive provider of risk data for the property and casualty insurance industry. But my ex-mother-in-law still hates me because her house is still in a flood zone. So it's a HazardHub flood zone. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's got to flood.
Let's go to John.
Good morning. I'm John Sigmund. I am one of the co-founders, along with Brady Faust, our chief data scientist, who's not on the call. And as Bob said, we've worked together looking at things geospatially enabled for a long, long time. And with that, about 4 or 5 years ago, we all got together and said, hey, there's a lot of cool data out there. There's a lot of new ways of doing things. And we said, why not? We've built this data twice before, so we're not rookies at it. And every time we get better. And so we said, let's change the way that things are done. Let's focus on a few different markets in the space, and here we are.
Phil, when you started this conversation, you described the Invitational, and you said that we couldn't innovate on our own. Chances are, if we had thought of doing something like a collection of data that HazardHub would do, we'd probably make a mess of it, right?
Well, more than likely. Well, we can't innovate on everything alone. Is probably a better way to say it, right? The focus that the InsurTech and FinTech community bring. I mean, look at the elements that HazardHub bring. When we're talking about fire hydrants for an extreme focus, right? That's like knowing where all the manholes are in New York City. I'm sure there's value to that, and there's benefit to that, but that's a very focused piece. And we are, as you know, worried about significant numbers of claims and multiple client needs and 32 different product sets that we still need to innovate around, not to mention building out a digital platform that allow us to connect to the InsurTechs and FinTechs and interoperate with them. So at some point, you stretch yourself thin. Yeah. And as we've discussed like more than once, Faisal, I mean, there are a lot of competent and capable InsurTechs out there that we could choose from. And I think that today we're primarily making our bets around those whose relationship established with us quickly. That dating service, there's such value to that, because for the next 4 or 5 months in particular, we're going to pay a lot of attention to our 4 finalists. And the reason is simple. I mean, our size, 60,000+ staff global company, still requires a lot of focus on a lot of different things. And we're here to see our partners succeed. So the extra love and attention by doing 2, 3, 4 at a time versus trying to boil an ocean, we think is of huge value. And that focus, that attention. So I throw that actually back to the HazardHub folks. One of the things we're trying to do is make sure that you're getting that extra attention and make sure that this is successful sooner rather than later, to not act like a big company, but frankly, to act more like a mentor and a big brother as we establish a relationship. And I'd like to know how that works for you, and what could we do better or more to help establish that relationship?
Well, the industry that we work in is a slow-moving industry. So you can't push too hard. You run the risk of sort of overshooting the runway. That said, when you talk about building a competency in this area, could you do it? You guys would probably spend more time getting all the paperwork straightened out. And in that meantime, we've built 3 new data sets. We have an extreme focus on what we do. But one of the things that we did early in our process was we built this to be scalable both vertically and horizontally. Vertically by computing power. So if we go from 10 million inquiries a day to 100 million inquiries a day, it's really just a matter of scale of technology. But then the other thing that we built was the scale of the data, so that we could slice the data and improve the data on a continuous basis. And then the third dimension is scalability of delivery. And that's where you guys come in. That's where partners come in. We built everything. We made a strategic decision very, very early that we would make everything accessible via our API. So that API doesn't care whether it's being consumed by a carrier or by a partner. So you guys bring us leverage and you bring us introduction, because you've got a lot of carrier partners and you've got InsurTech partners who need this sort of data. We build the plugin to your platform, and then everyone has access to it. Right. So that's our business model. We do business directly with carriers. It wasn't necessarily, Joe, why don't you explain why we like to partner and our process around that?
Sure. So when you looked at, 2 of the dimensions that Bob mentioned were the data scalability and basically the delivery scalability. The data scalability, our data is designed so it is always up to date. And it is a patent pending process, which is really sort of cool, that allows us to have speed in not only bringing new data sets to the market, but also in bringing updates to the market. So our data is always updated. We very early decided to go with a partner process. And while we do have, as Bob mentioned, carrier customers that come to us directly, mostly because I cannot turn down a signed check or a signed contract. That's just not in my nature to do so. We recognize that you have tons of relationships that already exist. And there's no need for us to recreate all of those relationships. We want to enhance those relationships and enhance what our partners are doing in the market space. So we've got a number of partners that are policy admin systems, insurance inspection companies, AI companies, modelers, a few direct resellers, people who are just adding our data to what they do, that allow us to have a much larger reach than we could ever dream of just by doing it ourselves. And so we said, you know what, I don't want to say that our business model is the George Costanza business model of looking at what our competitors do and then doing the opposite.
Yeah.
But our competitors don't partner well. And because the way that we designed our business to partner. So we want to work with partners. We want to work with everybody, making you and your salespeople a little bit more educated about our space to know enough to say, hey, there's an opportunity here. And then when there is that opportunity, to bring in Bob, I, Brady, any of our staff to back them up when the tough questions come.
I think I'd like to take a zoomed out view of just this opportunity and in the terms of what organizations, corporations our size really are dealing with. DXC is in the business of developing these industrial strength solutions for insurance companies and other industries. And we have, over the years, over the perhaps even decades, kind of lulled ourselves into the position that we could innovate on our own. What Phil kind of described was the acceptance that we don't want to. Not just that we can't, we probably could, and just put enough seriousness, put enough cycles into it, put enough money into it. Maybe we could build a HazardHub, but we don't want to, because really we want to focus on the whole long tail of opportunities that that we could add features through partnerships. We're not the only ones thinking about this, and so it's really interesting to see your acceptance of those partnerships, and perhaps that's why we work so well together.
Well, you know, everybody gets a little bit too egotistical sometimes. Like they're the only person in the room who can come up with the answer. And frankly, you guys have built a tremendous business. And for us to sit here and say, we don't need that stuff, that's old school, it's just silly. You know, like John said, it's like you already have a business. We want to help you improve that business. And we want to help you have tools that make your tools even better. So some of the other folks in the marketplace are really insistent upon building their own comprehensive solution. And frankly, we just don't have interest in that. I like to think of it as maybe we're just too lazy to do it. But it's like, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. I'd rather find where the hydrants are. You know, that's just what our specialty is. You know, I'd rather uncover new risks that we hadn't looked at before. I'd rather innovate in our niche rather than trying to be super comprehensive, which means we need to partner. And that's what you bring to us, is the ability to say, okay, I'm going to do all this claims management stuff. But what happened if I threw all this data on there and said, maybe I can predict these claims better, or maybe I can underwrite better because I learned things from having all of this data in the claim process that helped me make a smarter underwriting decision on the front end. That's the kind of vision into the process that we simply don't have, because we're so focused on building a particular aspect of the answer. We rely on you guys to say, hey, you know, here's how this answer fits into multiple channels of the business.
Yeah, exactly. So Phil, anecdotally, would you say that our customers appreciate this? Does it resonate with them?
Oh, absolutely. We've recently had conversations with a number of insurers that, you know, comes down to how the availability of this kind of information helps them assess and underwrite risk.
By the way, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not trying to make it seem like there's a halo behind my head, but the sun came in. It just, there we go. Okay. Good.
Not a problem, Bob.
Okay, sorry.
Trust me, this call's gone much better than the last one, the Faisal.
It's just Bob's special aura.
You start talking about risks enough, and then the halo.
And it glows.
Yeah.
Last session, we lacked guests.
Yeah, just the Phil and Faisal show.
But yeah, and we take this conversationally and presentation-wise to a number of our clients as we highlight our work with the InsurTechs and the value is manifold. I'm going to give you an example of the fallacy of data, and then we'll touch on exactly what their interest is in HazardHub. You know, we can do lots of assessment these days, and I can look at somebody's phone, and I can determine that, hey, they've got Netflix, they've got Hulu and Grubhub and Uber Eats. Okay. And well, you know, as a property and casualty organization, that tells me that they're probably at home on a Friday or Saturday, high risk times for driving. They're in phone bar to them, they're watching a movie. And that's good stuff, maybe even discount worthy. As a life and wealth carrier, I'm looking at someone who's probably not eating well, who's sitting on the couch way too long and not getting enough exercise. Same data. And where this goes is it's knowing the value of the data, the source of it. And what HazardHub brings is that assurance that the data is good, that it is accurate. And then it's up to the carriers to determine what to do with it. So understanding that perhaps you're using it as a risk assessment. Maybe the other part is someone has just moved in, or I'm insuring an Airbnb place. Well, that means that those using that home for that week or those 2 weeks, they may have no clue where the fire hydrant is, and they may need to. And so the insurer has worked with the owner of the home that, hey, if something happens in the area, you're providing a call, making those folks aware of where things are, what to do, how to act. And so it goes well beyond simply the knowledge and the risk assessment of a location for a hydrant, and an engagement whereby you're saving people, you are involving them in their own care and safety. And I think that's where things are going. And I'm wondering if you folks are seeing those you're talking to look in that same direction, to engage more than simply on a policy, but to reduce that risk, price right, and then to take it that next level to use it as an element of insurance versus insurance.
You know, I think that is a really interesting example of what it is that we have chosen to do. And we made a decision that we're not gonna look retrospectively and then build a product. What we're gonna do is we're gonna build a product, we're gonna keep building the product, and we know we're gonna be a year or two ahead of everybody else in the marketplace. And we're willing to accept that because that's in our DNA. The use case that you described is exactly why we built the company. We think that people's homes are their most important investment most of the time. Yet they know so little about what some of these risks are that they end up getting, like, for example, the people in Paradise. Would it have helped them to know that their entire community was in a wildfire zone? You know, maybe they knew that, maybe they didn't. Maybe they would have taken those notices more seriously as soon as the fire started, that they would leave faster. You know, would that have made a difference? It's really difficult to say. And that's an opinion that a lot of times carriers don't want to take because it exposes them to some level of risk. So we know that making our data available to their end consumers is a use case that's still probably a year, maybe even 2 years away. But we've built our business around the idea of sharing that because we want people to know. We want everybody to know. We want the consumer or the insured. We want the carrier to feel comfortable with this data enough so that they can make it part of their customer communication process. Mm-hmm. So, hey, listen, there's a drought going on. And when there's a drought, then wildfire risk increases at your property. Make sure you have 5 feet of clearance around your house. It's a relatively small thing to say that can make a huge difference in the survivability of a property. But we're not quite there yet from an industry. I do think that some of the sort of data-oriented InsurTechs are more aggressive with that approach than traditional carriers who rely maybe on a general agency system that they don't necessarily control. But that's a leading edge application that we're ready for today. But we know that people aren't going to use that data that way for probably not a year or two. It's the founder's dilemma. You know, you build something for 2 to 3 years down the road, and then you hope that you don't starve yourself in those 2 to 3 years. You know, until that becomes a reality.
Well, I have a strong feeling that we could accelerate that. So I'd like to hear from you guys how we could do that. What would the partnership steps for a better outcome for you guys be?
Well, I think from a partnership standpoint, you need to take a look at where your customers are needing the data. So as Bob said, we're sort of on the leading edge of a lot of data. And one of the questions that I always ask my audience when I'm out presenting is, how many of you know what percentage of your claims fall within a quarter mile of an underground storage tank? Okay. Nobody, unless they're a customer of ours, raises their hand. Then I tell them to put their hand down because they don't count. But then my follow-up question is, what would you do if you knew 100% of your claims fell within a quarter mile of an underground storage tank? And nobody's ever stood up and said exactly what they would do, but we all have a pretty good idea of what they would do. They'd either charge appropriately or stop writing those policies, right? Let somebody else take that risk. And part of the reason that we put together all the data that we've put together is we don't know if it's necessarily valuable or not to an insurer today, but it might be tomorrow, because a lot of the things that we happen to have, we have over 23 proprietary data sets that we've built that nobody else has, including hydrant locations, that allow people to make decisions that they didn't know that they could make. And so we've always taken it as, well, that's just the way it is because we don't know. And we're trying to eliminate the we don't know part of that. So we can change that the way it is. And so with that, it allows our customers to be a little bit more progressive, a little bit more intelligent about what they're doing. And then for a number of our customers, it also allows them to send a better file off to reinsurers. And the reinsurers then have much more confidence in what they're doing, which then lowers the cost to our customer base. So it's a big circle of looking at different data and different approaches that allow our customers to have a slight competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage turns into a lot of money. And then working through our partners, we get out to the market a little bit quicker, a little bit more intelligently, because our data slides right into what you're doing with your customer base and how you're doing it. And then they get the ability to see very quickly without having to do any type of integration that doesn't already exist, because you exist in their ecosphere. And it makes it very easy for them to then address different data points, take a look at it, store it, come back to it later, whatever they want to do within your system to essentially become a better insurer.
So it's a perfect segue to some plans that we have, of which you guys are a part. We are developing a new mechanism for doing just those integrations. We call it Developer Central, and it's intended just what it sounds like. It's a developer portal to make accessible those data points that you could consume, but also to make available HazardHub's data to the appropriate consumers of it in an experimental sandbox kind of environment, to kind of see the goodness that you can make of it. Yep. And I'm guessing that may give you some of the signals about how to what data points that become interesting.
You know, there's a couple of things that you guys bring to the table. There's sort of the strategic and the mechanical. And the strategic is, like John said, you know your customers' needs more than we do. So for your strategists to say, okay, you're having an issue around here, here's a company to talk to, is level one of the engagement. Level two is, well, now you've introduced me to this great company that has the absolute best data in the industry. How do I get it into my system?
Yep.
Which is the mechanical portion of thing, which is partially Developer Central. So we look to you guys as sort of, we know the mechanical parts are relatively straightforward. It's an API call, for crying out loud. To us, it's relatively straightforward. The strategic part is the hard part for us, because that's where you have the relationship. You know the customer's pain points. As those pain points look like something that HazardHub data can help with, that's when we think we add the most value.
Mm.
I think also one of the things that we need to concern ourselves with, as Bob mentioned very early, we deliver a lot of data. We deliver over 500 variables, and that number is not going down. That number is only going to continue to go up. And a lot of people look at it and go, I can't handle that much data. and we don't expect them to. You know, consumers can select the variables that they want to take a look at. The companies can focus on the things that are only important to them or they believe are important to them. But a lot of our companies, even our smaller companies that work directly with us, take it all and they store it. And they know that they're not going to be able to get to it today. But when they do have some downtime, their data scientists, their actuaries, their underwriters will have the opportunity to take a look and then possibly build upon that and say, yeah, guess what? There are 2 or 3 key variables that we're not using that are really important to us that we now need to bring into the front end so we can better define a profitable policy, a policy that's not going to make claims, you know, things along those lines that are important to them so they can better refine their upfront ability to use us, where they're only paying on the bind when they actually are successful, versus having all the data and being overwhelmed by it. So we understand the process and the premise. It's just simply saying, okay, here it is. If you can't use it all today, great, store it. We don't care. And then when you get the opportunity to actually do a deep dive, you'll have the data there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Fundamentally, the way we met each other was through the process of the DXC Invitational, and we intend to do more of these. Phil, could you kind of give us a description of what's next for DXC Invitational?
Well, yeah, as you know, we've had a lot of requests globally to duplicate what we've done in the U.S. and in Australia before then. Our next target is late Q1, early Q2 in Asia to do an invitational there. And, you know, it's interesting, Faisal, is what does invitational mean regionally, right? You and I keep learning it's not always the same thing everywhere that we go. And, you know, InsurTech is a looser definition. FinTech's probably more appropriate. I keep trying to think, you know, it's not tech for a company that does something that's more technical in nature and not industry specific, or, you know, or Gen Tech. So we look at the partners, we look at the capabilities. So we look at folks like HazardHub, and, you know, finding them and having them find us is the key to our success. In some elements, their own as well. But in Asia, as you know, we're looking for something where it may very well be more technically centric, because that's what they're comfortable with, versus the kind of song and dance Shark Tank version that we did. But nonetheless, I think that as we do more, things broaden. You know my thoughts for our next conference, how big I think the presence of InsurTech should be at it, and what that'll mean for our clients and for us to have 20, right, 25 present on a given day. It's an industry, it's a world that's changing, and I'll say this, that, you know, we're embracing it, and we're doing several InsurTech invitationals a year now, all regionally. And, you know, I would pose one question. I've asked everyone this as well, guys, is, you know, the internet boom was different, and a lot of the things led to their various failures or the downfall. The point of entry, the hurdle these days is lower. The way the AWS, the Google, the Azure, the infrastructure investment, the developer tools, so many things have come around from a cost perspective to allow and facilitate the innovation. How do you see this being different from that period, and what's next for HazardHub?
Web 1.0, I can still paper my walls with the stock certificates from the companies I work with in Web 1.0. You know, I think that in InsurTech specifically, InsurTechs don't die for lack of good ideas. They die from starvation and the industry being slow to react. I think that the industry is changing and recognizing that they need to innovate more, and as evidenced by innovation groups at several carriers that we've talked to. So I don't think that the implosion will occur quite the same way it did in Web 1.0. What's next for HazardHub is to build more data to answer more questions. Yeah. You know, for example, what about the contents of a building, you know, as opposed of a commercial building? What's the overall risk of a commercial building based upon the type of employees in that building? Are the types of things that we're looking for next year? How do we get even more comprehensive data sets? What are we missing? How can we continue to invent? How can we improve the data sets that we have? So we've grown enormously in the last year. We look to grow even more enormously next year by expanding our partnership with DXC, by innovating more for data, and by bringing more people under seeing the benefits of HazardHub and taking on the giants and slinging that rock right between their eyes and growing, grow.
Yeah.
So anything to pitch us before we close? I'm really interested in the upcoming Asia Invitational. Phil, you'd say what, like first quarter, second quarter, 2019?
Yeah, that's where I see things heading. You know, you and I would both like to speed that up, but we have to, support all the elements to get these things moving. They move quickly and kind of their own strength once they get started. But boy, that's no simple task, It
was for any InsurTechs who might be watching. It was really a stunning event. The quality of the event was incredible in terms of the professionalism of the team, the size and scope of the audience, the ability to get in and talk to people was really second to none. It was an extremely impressive event.
Well, thank you, Bob. I think we'd love to have you act as mentor to some of the new candidates, if that's something that we could make work practically. So
sure, I'm happy to help.
Okay. Well, I think that's a wrap. We're more or less out of time. So we appreciate your time in this. It's been fascinating as always. And we look forward to our next Tech Thursday.
All right.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Phil.
Take care, everybody.
Hey, enjoy the holidays. Take care now.
Bye.